Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Science of Science Fiction, the Influence of Film and Fiction on the Science and Culture of Our Times, by Mark Brake, narrated by Matt Godfrey. Pythagoras with the looking-glass reflects the full moon. In blood, he's writing the lyrics of a brand new tune. Genesis. Introduction. Here's a true story about my own science fiction past. When I was a kid, I used to fill my days by reading lots of futuristic science fiction stories. Stories about space, tales about time travel, entertaining yarns about gadgets and inventions, and comic book accounts of the superpowers we might one day possess. The influence of these stories on my friends and me was simply huge. It occupied our waking hours as well as our dreams. It gifted us fevered and fertile imaginations. My friend Zap shared this fertile imagination, fed and fueled by science fiction. In fact, our imaginations became so fevered that one day, Zap managed to convince me and some other friends that we could become superheroes. How would such superhero status be achieved? Simply by necking, that's local slang for drinking, some super serum, made by Zap's own fair hand. Yes, we must have been sweetly innocent, or stupid, to believe this fable and fabric of nonsense, straight out of the comic books, channeled through Zap's imagination and back out into the real world. We waited and waited for the big day when our transformation from boy into superboy would come. We grew impatient. But Zap, when are we going to become superheroes? We justifiably asked. Don't worry about that, dudes. I've got it covered. I'm making some super serum in my dad's crib. Yes, super serum in his dad's crib on a housing project in Britain back in those swinging 60s. Sure, Stan Lee's Marvel superhero tales in the 1960s were all about ordinary folk like us. Stan had revolutionized the genre with a large dose of reality. Down-to-earth characters living everyday lives with stories peopled by folk who had personal problems. But super serum in his dad's crib on a housing project? It would have been wise to question the validity of Zap's claims. But wise we were not, as Yoda might chime. We were far too distracted by the promise of all the trappings superhero-dom brings. Jumping over buildings, stopping speeding bullets, and of course, the girls. We got tired of waiting. Zap kept on promising, but nothing was delivered. In the end, we simply demanded the super serum, at once, with no delay, now. We demanded the ability to jump over buildings, to stop speeding bullets, and of course, we demanded the girls. We followed Zap home and impatiently waited outside his house until he brought forth the super serum. In comics, inventors often appear to bring forth the invention. As Zap triumphantly came out of the lab, his dad's crib, our breath was fully bated. What was he carrying, you may wonder? A sleek test tube full of some fluorescent and clearly cosmic super serum worthy of Hugo Strange? Perhaps a wizard potion in a cool Professor Snape-ish vial? Or a huge syringe with which to transform us forever? No. Zap came out of his house with nothing more than a bowl full of ordinary water. Gutted. In fact, mega eviscerated. Picture this, my friends and I in a towering Hulk-like rage, reaching almost superhero proportions without the help of a super serum. After all that waiting, we were incensed. We were severely disappointed. We were incandescent. We hurled the bowl of water over Zap's head and stormed off into the sunset, disillusioned, but determined to find a brighter future. A science fiction world. Maybe my early super serum experience is the main reason why, ever since, I've gotten a huge buzz on hearing that one of the predictions I read about as a kid has actually turned out to be true. If you've lived the dream from the start and see the idea turn into reality, it can be simply inspiring. It very much depends on perspective, though. Take this example. I was recently blown away by the fact that, sitting in a greasy British cafe, I was still able to watch a live soccer match on my phone. I was suitably enthusiastic to my kids. "Look, kids, I'm watching the football. It's the future. It's science fiction," I said. My kids were totes unfazed. "No, Dad, it's just a smartphone." And yet, years before, I'd already found my niche as a professor of science communication at a British university, where I'd invented study courses that focused on the future. One course was all about the search for alien life in space, and another was all about the links between science and science fiction. But the one thing they had in common was our future on Earth and in space. As a university science professor, I also did some writing for NASA and organized speaking tours for Russian cosmonauts, pioneers of space travel. Through my work, I found that humans have been making up science fiction stories for hundreds of years, much longer than you'd think. Some of the earliest stories were about space voyages. They're in this book. They come from a time, the early 1600s, when astronomers had found that the Earth was in orbit around the Sun and not the other way around. Ships had started voyaging around the globe 400 years ago, so writers had already started to imagine sailing out into space. Since then, there have been thousands of amazing science fiction stories about aliens and time machines, spaceships and cyborgs, androids and the end of the world. These stories all have one thing in common. They are about the way science may affect our lives in the future. So it should be no surprise that this book is about the future. We are the first generation to live in a science fiction world. Media headlines declare this the age of automation. The TV talks about the coming revolution of the robot. Tweets tell tales of jets that will ferry travelers to the edge of space. And social media reports that the first human to live for 1,000 years has already been born. The science we do, the movies we watch, and the culture we consume is the stuff of fiction that became fact. The future, imagined in our past, the future we now inhabit. This book is the story of how science fiction shaped our world. No longer a subculture, science fiction has moved into the mainstream with the advent of the information age it helped realize. Explore how science fiction has driven science. This book will open your eyes to the way science fiction helped us dream of things to come, forced us to uncover the nature and limits of our own reality, and helped us build the science fiction-driven world we live in today. Part 1. Space. It's where no one can hear you scream, in Ridley Scott's Alien. It's the final frontier, in Star Trek. It's the realm of Pandora, in James Cameron's Avatar, along with a billion other habitable worlds of the imagination. The science fiction of space focuses on some facet of the natural world. Very often, the space theme is about the outward human urge to conquer and master the vast interstellar depths of the cosmos, in the classic manner of Captain Kirk, and the legions of fleet and nimble ships of Star Wars and other space operas. In other tales, space is the vast, cold, and unsympathetic theater featured in Alien, or the immense void in Interstellar, a cosmos we may never come to terms with. The sheer indifference of space, such as featured in The Martian, reminds us that life may be frail and precious, but also tenacious, and that the universe is largely inhuman and deserted. That Shakespeare of science fiction, H.G. Wells, really started something with the War of the Worlds back at the end of the 19th century. Wells's Martians were an early warning of what was to come. They were the first agents of the void, the first menace from space. The Martians were Wells's timely reminder that we may not be at the top of the universe's evolutionary ladder. The alien is one of science fiction's greatest inventions. The alien is featured here in the space theme rather than monster theme for two reasons. For one, science fiction very often portrays the alien, such as the Na'vi in Avatar or the heptapods in Arrival, as animated versions of nature. Second, the monster theme in science fiction focuses on the human condition, and, as we shall see, it's about the monster within us, not without. A lot of science fiction stories about space can be understood as a longing to escape our sense of being merely human. Earth is our prison. That's why we get tales in which the wonders and potential terrors of the universe are explored through the marvels of space travel, bringing tales of contact with extraterrestrial beings. Indeed, space stories have often been extrapolations of travelers' tales to lost or forgotten lands on Earth. The space theme shows us that there are great similarities between science fiction and science, and that science fiction has been a huge influence on modern science and culture. Science fiction is an imaginative device for a kind of theoretical science, the exploration of imagined worlds. Scientists build models of hypothetical worlds and then test their theories. Albert Einstein was famous for this. His Gedanken experiment, or thought experiments, led to his theory of special relativity, for example. The science fiction writer also explores hypothetical worlds, but with more scope. Scientists are meant to stay within bounded laws. Science fiction has no such boundaries. However, we can see that a spirit of what if is common to both science and science fiction. There are many examples where science fiction has proposed theories far too speculative for the science of the day, but that have later proved to be prophetic. The theme of space contains some great examples. Space travel, exoplanets, men on the moon, to name just a few. However, it's important to remember that the correctness of the science is not as important as its poetry, or the sense of wonder and adventure experienced in pursuit of the science itself. One of the best examples of the symbiosis of science and science fiction to be found anywhere is the question of life in space, or astrobiology. Through most of its history, science fiction has held a positive view of the possibility of alien life. Much of hard science fiction is made up mostly of two main sciences, physics and biology. Historically, physics came a lot earlier. Nicholas Copernicus shifted the center of the universe from the Earth to the Sun way back in 1543. Just over a century later, Isaac Newton produced a system of the world, one of the first attempts to produce a theory of everything. As a result, early fictional accounts of alien life, from Johannes Kepler's Somnium to H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds, were based mostly on the physics in question. Simply put, the argument was based on the idea that since there are billions of stars in the universe, there must be millions, if not billions, of planets. Plenty of places for ET to live. This line of reasoning is much like the principle of plenitude. Everything that can happen will happen. And in a universe fit for life, many planets will bear bug-eyed monsters. For a long time, the mere physics of the matter has been fiction's main concern. Biology didn't come into it. The fact of the sheer number of stars and orbiting planets was enough to suggest that life on other Earths lay waiting in the vastness of deep space. The influence was fed back into science, so that by the 20th century, an entire generation of scientists was cast under the same spell, and huge investments were made in serious searches for alien life. Meanwhile, a unified theory of biology didn't see the light of day until the second half of the 20th century. It brought a modern synthesis of aspects of biology, and was accepted by the great majority of working biologists. This evolutionary synthesis provided a new perspective on the question of ET. Biologists are far more skeptical about the possibility of complex alien life, let alone intelligence. We may, they concluded, be alone in the universe after all. So let's venture into the space theme of science fiction to meet lost worlds and quantum universes, other Earths, and the human future in the cosmos. Guardians of the Galaxy. Is space full of extraterrestrials? Behind every man now alive stand 30 ghosts, for that is the ratio by which the dead outnumber the living. Since the dawn of time, roughly 100 billion human beings have walked the planet Earth. Now, this is an interesting number. For by a curious coincidence, there are approximately 100 billion stars in our local universe, the Milky Way. So, for every man who has ever lived, in this universe there shines a star. But every one of those stars is a sun, often far more brilliant and glorious than the small nearby star we call the sun. And many, perhaps most, of those alien suns have planets circling them. So almost certainly there is enough land in the sky to give every member of the human species back to the first ape man his own private, world-sized heaven, or hell. How many of those potential heavens and hells are now inhabited? And by what manner of creatures? We have no way of guessing. The very nearest is 1,000,000 times farther away than Mars or Venus, those still remote goals of the next generation. But the barriers of distance are crumbling. One day we shall meet our equals, or our masters, among the stars. Men have been slow to face this prospect. Some still hope that it may never become a reality. Increasing numbers, however, are asking, why have such meetings not occurred already, since we ourselves are about to venture into space? Why not, indeed? Here is one possible answer to that very reasonable question. But please remember, this is only a work of fiction. The truth, as always, will be far stranger. Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Yondu is floating in the air, hanging on his arrow. Peter Quill. You look like Mary Poppins. Yondu. Is he cool? Peter Quill. Hell yeah, he's cool. Yondu. I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. James Gunn, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 Screenplay. The idea of a universe full of extraterrestrial life has produced many of the best movie taglines. In space, no one can hear you scream. We are not alone. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The truth is out there. And of course, you only get one chance to save the galaxy twice. Science fiction writers and directors have thought long and hard about the portrayal of creatures from other worlds. The predatory and possessive mother in Ridley Scott's Alien, the swirling and sentient sea in Steven Soderbergh's Solaris, and the wise, benevolent sage with curious sentence construction in George Lucas's Star Wars series have three very contrasting extraterrestrial types: alien as highly evolved killer, alien as ocean planet, and alien as guiding mentor, perhaps only lacking a little gravitas due to being a puppet. There are huge numbers of extraterrestrial races in the Marvel Comics universe, so much so that the Guardians of the Galaxy, a band of former intergalactic outlaws, have teamed up to protect the galaxy from planetary threats. The Galactic Council is an assembly of leaders of different alien empires from across that universe, with major races such as the Kree and the Skrulls presiding over scores of secondary alien races, mostly humanoid but occasionally weird, such as the Oskvari, a green-skinned race with octopus traits, three-toed, taloned feet, 3 tentacles sprouting from each shoulder rather than arms, and closely spaced needle-like teeth, which would make a mess of an intergalactic burger. But just in case you thought this was all new, take a look at how long aliens have dwelled in the human imagination. Science fiction, driven by the discoveries of science, has been conjuring up extraterrestrials for many a moon. In fact, for much longer than you'd first imagine. Take the relationship between Italian astronomer Galileo and German math genius Johannes Kepler, for example. Moved by Galileo's discoveries with the telescope, Kepler was one of the first writers to imagine alien life. And this is in the first few years of the 1600s. Kepler made sure that the extraterrestrials stalking the characters in his proto-science fictional book Somnium, published in 1634, were not humans. Instead, they are serpent-like creatures that are fit to survive their lunar but quite alien haunt. So, more than 2 centuries before Darwin, Johannes Kepler had been the first to grasp the bond between life forms and habitat. Science and science fiction. But, generally speaking, before science fiction really rocketed into the creative imagination in the late 19th century, extraterrestrials were not normally portrayed as genuine alien beings. They were merely seen as humans and animals living on other worlds. Charles Darwin changed all that. For Darwin essentially invented the alien. Darwin's theory of evolution gave science fiction grounds for imagining what kind of life might evolve off Earth as well as on it. From Darwin on, the notion of life beyond our home planet was linked with the physical and mental characteristics of the true extraterrestrial, and the idea of the alien became deeply embedded in the public imagination. So it's no surprise that the most credible extraterrestrials occur after his work. The archetypal alien, with its strange physiology and intellect, also owes much to H.G. Wells's first major take on Darwin, Wells's 1898 Martian invasion novel, The War of the Worlds. Wells's Martians are agents of the void. They are the brutal natural force of evolution, and history's first menace from space. Wells's genocidal invaders, would-be colonists of planet Earth, were so influential that the alien as monster became something of a cliché in the 20th century, and the idea thrills us still. The alien as monster stalks the Nostromo in Ridley Scott's electrifying movie Alien, lies at the heart of each Dalek in Doctor Who, and briefly, to the soundtrack of ELO's Mr. Blue Sky, consumes Drax during the surreal opening title sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. With advances in science, especially biology, early writers became more imaginative about alien life forms. Evolution traveled into space with the writings of French astronomer Camille Flammarion in 1872, barely a dozen years or so after Darwin published The Origin of Species. Flammarion's 3 Stories of Infinity were ingenious tales of an intangible alien life force. If natural selection was universal, there was no reason on Earth why the random process of evolution should merely produce humanoids on other planets. Distinguished British astronomer Fred Hoyle used his science to inspire his stories, but his fiction was not forced by his physics. Hoyle's first novel, The Black Cloud, is about a living cloud of interstellar matter. Polish science fiction writer Stanisław Lem pushed the creative imagination about alien life even further. In his famous Solaris, now an entire planet enclosed by an ocean, Solaris is portrayed as a single organism with a vast yet strange intelligence that humans strive to understand. And then, of course, there's the depiction of the extraterrestrial as wise, benevolent teacher, here to save us from ourselves. There are the kind of aliens that show up in films such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the extraterrestrials are presented as civilized and munificent aliens of superior intelligence. In the same way, aliens such as Yoda possess an almost saintly wisdom, and Marvel's Watchers are cast in a similar vein. One of the oldest species in the universe, the Watchers are committed to watching and compiling knowledge on all aspects of life in the cosmos. But here's the point about all these different portrayals of extraterrestrial life. Even though science has made tremendous advances in the understanding of space during the 20th and 21st centuries, scientists still have relatively little to say about the psychology and physiology of the alien. That's the job of science fiction, which has been conducting a kind of continuous thought experiment on the matter for centuries. British science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke knows all about this relationship. He stressed the influence of science fiction on the alien life debate when he said in 1968, "I have little doubt that the universe is teeming with life. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, is now a fully accepted department of astronomy. The fact that it is still a science without a subject should be neither surprising nor disappointing. It is only within half a human lifetime that we have possessed the technology to listen to the stars." Clarke was very aware of the huge inspiration that science takes from fiction. In the history of the scientific debate on alien life, There have typically been two camps: physicists and biologists. The physical scientists, such as astronomers, have often tended toward a deterministic view of the possibility of extraterrestrial life. They focus on the physical forces in the universe and make arguments based on the sheer number of stars and orbiting planets, which they feel is somehow statistically sufficient to suggest that other Earths lie waiting in the vastness of deep space. Fiction, for many centuries, led from the front with this same argument. And since Copernicus came before Darwin, and physics before biology, fictional accounts of alien life have usually been placed firmly in the pro-SETI, pro-life camp of the alien debate. By the 20th century, an entire generation of future SETI hunters was cast under the same spell, and the imaginative power of science fiction meant that a huge investment of time and money was put into the serious scientific search for extraterrestrials. But as the 20th century progressed, the story changed. Some scientists thought we might, after all, be alone in the universe. In particular, biologists began to emphasize that while physics and fiction still think along deterministic lines, evolutionists are impressed by the incredible improbability of intelligent life ever to have evolved, even on Earth. Or, to put it in the powerful words of American anthropologist Lauren Isley, so deep is the conviction that there must be life out there beyond the dark, one thinks that if they are more advanced than ourselves, they may come across space at any moment, perhaps in our generation. Later, contemplating the infinity of time, one wonders if perchance their messages came long ago, hurtling into the swamp muck of the steaming coal forests, the bright projectile clambered over by hissing reptiles, and the delicate instruments running mindlessly down with no report. In the nature of life and in the principles of evolution, we have had our answer. Of men elsewhere and beyond, there will be none forever. It may be tomorrow, or a decade or century from now, until we discover if Guardians of the Galaxy is right. The day may come when we make the most shattering discovery of all time, the discovery of a thriving extraterrestrial civilization. When our current century dawned, we'd been imagining alien life for almost 2.5 millennia, but as space agencies build flotillas of space telescopes to search for life in this unearthly universe, the crucial questions remain unanswered. The American Space Observatory Kepler, launched in 2009 to find Earth-like planets orbiting other stars, took off 400 years after Galileo's first use of the telescope, and is, of course, named after that first great Copernican theorist, Johannes Kepler. Based on Kepler's early findings, Seth Shostak, senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, estimated that within 1,000 light-years of Earth, there are at least 30,000 habitable planets. Based on the same findings, the Kepler team projected at least 50 billion planets in the Milky Way, of which at least 500 million are in the habitable zone. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory was of a similar opinion. JPL reported an expectation of 2 billion Earth analogs in our galaxy, and noted there are around 50 billion other galaxies potentially bearing around 1 sextillion Earth analog planets. Over those last 2,500 years, a stunning array of writers and scholars, philosophers and filmmakers have devoted their energies to imagining life beyond this Earth. Their task has been to try reducing the gap between the new worlds uncovered by science and exploration and the fantastic, strange worlds of the imagination. Their huge contribution has been important, not only in the way that the fictional imagination has helped us visualize the unknown, but also for the way in which it has helped us define our place in a changing cosmos. Stories rule. In the rich evolution of the question of extraterrestrial life, science fiction has influenced issues and debates in science, and in turn, popular culture has been inspired by scientific discovery and invention. The history of the alien has hinted at the revolutionary effects on human science, society, and culture, that knowledge of another civilization will bring. If we may be so bold as to suggest that humanity is at least one way in which the cosmos can know itself, what more is out there to be done?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?